everybody. As we're assembling our second panel, I will go ahead and introduce myself. Everybody's getting spotlighted as I do this. My name is Kelsey Kauger, and I am the voting campaigns organizer for the READ project and for UU's for social justice. And it is just my absolute honor and pleasure to have spent the year working alongside this incredible group of just talented, dynamic, badass women. And it's a real pleasure to be able to present this group for everybody today. As people are getting spotlighted, I will go through and do some introductions, and then we will jump right into our questions. We have here today Pam Coucos, who's the co-founder of the READ Project for Voting Rights, the very newly ordained Reverend Lisa Garcia-Sampson, the executive director of Forward Together North Carolina. We have Elizabeth Alex, the organizing director for CASA, Kazimir Brown, who's the deputy director of religious affairs for the Poor People's Campaign, Sara Benitiz, who's the vice president of organizing for Faith and Public Life, and last but not least, the great Nicole Pressley, the national organizer for UU to Vote. So I'm just going to jump right in, if that's all right with all of you. One of the things that struck me as we were putting this panel together is that what unites us is that everybody here on this panel is an organizer who's done on the ground work. And we're all people who spent the last election trying to combat voter suppression, particularly voter suppression as it's deployed against people of color. It can be easy to get in tunnel vision. And given how election focused our work has been, as an opening question, I'd just love to have you reflect on how we take that anti-suppression work and we move it past the election and sort of think about reframing our efforts as something proactive rather than just reactive. If you hate that question, you're absolutely welcome to reflect more generally on Representative Connolly's remarks as well. So I'll just go through my list, starting with Pam. Pam, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Kelsey. This is one of the best Hollywood Zoom squares I've been in a while. This is great. So, here's the thing. I think it always is affirmative, right? Because anything that we care about accomplishing in the world, we have to have the power to accomplish it, right? And so I always think of this work as foundational to racial and gender justice, climate justice, economic justice. Anything we need to change, we have to change the distribution of power, and that means voting and making voting accessible. And so I think the answer is we take the power that we have gained, both in terms of what happened in the elections and the power we have built by working with each other, and do that and push forward to make that change. And so that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited by the foundations that have been laid among all of our groups to be a very powerful coalition for justice.
Yeah, absolutely, Pam. I sent out an order to our panelists, but what you were saying speaks so much to the way we've been in partnership, particularly with Liz and Sara. If you don't mind, I'd like to jump to Liz and Sara before Liz, go ahead.
Thank you, Kelsey, and good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'm Liz from CASA, as Kelsey introduced, and for folks who aren't familiar with us, we are an immigrant rights organization and a membership organization in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And we ran the largest nonpartisan voter effort that we've ever run in Pennsylvania this year, with a lot of help from a lot of people on this call. And we were countering significant attempts to suppress the vote. Our constituency are Latino voters primarily, many of them first-time voters in Pennsylvania, many of them first-time voters ever, and a number of them newly transplanted voters from Puerto Rico who had moved to Pennsylvania in the last 4 years. And so we're voting for the first time in a presidential election in a new place, and in a new place that was specifically designed to make it hard for them to vote. We don't work in Philadelphia. We don't work in Pittsburgh. We work in the middle of the state, which resembles politically a lot of other places in the Midwest of the country, where people of color are not the first or the second or the third thought when systems are being designed. In fact, the systems are designed without them and against them to make it harder for people to vote. And I'll say on election day, we put together a voter guardian team of almost 500 people standing at polls, providing volunteer interpretation because it was not mandated or required or offered, providing a safe and friendly face because there were people with guns. There were, people with Trump flags. There were people actively attempting to intimidate voters as they walked in to vote. And there were lots of questions, just very basic questions about how do I vote? Because this is the first time ever that we had Act 77, which is a voter rights legislation that passed in Pennsylvania. And those people, I would say, that day on election day saved hundreds and hundreds of votes on election day. Forget all the work that we did to get them there. And so I'll forever be grateful for all those people who showed up. Some of you all drove from Maryland and from New York and from other places to support the work because we knew that Pennsylvania was so important, and it was such an uphill climb for Black and brown voters in the middle of Pennsylvania to make sure their vote was counted. But it was counted. Latino voters in particular in Pennsylvania voted in higher numbers than ever before in history, despite the odds. They were also the hardest hit community by COVID and are continuing to work in essential worker positions, but they voted, and they voted because their lives literally are depending on it, as well as thousands of lives of people who can't vote, but who were motivating those other individuals to vote. Yeah. Super excited to keep talking, but I know we have limited time. Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you, Liz. Sara, in your relationship with faith in public life, I wanted to position you next to Liz because you're working with similar communities. Can you speak a little bit about that, and also think a bit about how you anticipate moving this work beyond the election season?
Yeah, absolutely. And so great to be here. And thank you also to Liz and you, Kelsey, and others who partnered with us, both on Latino voter outreach in Virginia, as well as voter outreach and protection that is still ongoing in Georgia and African-American communities, and in Ohio and Florida this year. And so I think, one of the things that we're looking at is a very practical way to continue the work of voter protection and that very important work of redistributing power, which is keeping a constant engagement at the local level where a lot of decisions about how voting takes place are made with faith leaders, with communities of faith, and then also at a broader level and just in a narrative setting, and really living into what our mission and a big part of our work is also narrative shaping and putting out the connection between values as our values of people of faith and from a spiritual place for the vote and for democracy, and sort of reclaiming and claiming democracy and justice as very tied to faith values, and the importance then of seeing these policy changes and this redistribution of power as being absolutely essential and rooted in any kind of other change that we want to see that will, protect and further the thriving of all communities. So one of the ways is very practically what Representative Connolly talked about, pushing forward the changes from HR 1. But I think on a way that we can do that as well, and that we're looking at is, like I said, just really telling that story and making that very strong connection of countering the ongoing attempts of authoritarianism and claiming, democracy is about the value of each person. And unless we can uphold that through our systems, we don't have that in this country.
Sara, that is so beautifully put. Thank you so much for that framing. Kazimir, I bet you work with Poor People's Campaign, which I think about as just instrumental in doing that kind of work that, in the way that Sara is describing, where you you act in this very practical, election focused way, and you think about these larger scale structural issues. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. There's just a lot of great energy here. So this excites me. And then hearing about UUSJ's long legacy of having one issue and expanding that issue, and then moving also from education to education and advocacy. And that reminds me of the Poor People's Campaign, because we are strong in believing that there's 5 interlocking injustices: poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation and healthcare, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. So one of the big things in this fusion movement is that we don't break apart those policy points. It is all together because they are indeed interlocking. And specifically, we are centering the voices of poor and low-income people. That means in leadership, that means in policy agenda. So when we talked about voting, we reached out to millions, over 2 million poor and low-income people who are at a low propensity of voting. Oftentimes reach out to folks who we think are going to vote, but that's the thing. We have to reach out to folks who often don't hear their names being called. So yes, we did the work for voting, but now we are also, on June 20th, we launched our Jubilee Policy Platform. So what we did is that we have been talking with the Biden-Harris administration transition team, with members of Congress, and we're like, listen, from our Jubilee Policy Platform, within the first 100 days, we're not talking about years, we're talking about 100 days, we need to push forward these 14 policy agendas. And I know some people might say, oh, 14 is a lot. But listen, during this pandemic, we saw corporations get $3 trillion worth of things. So we can push forth 14. And it's important to push forth these 14 bold agendas. And I would like to read some off as far as what we're looking for and advocating for, and doing that within the first 100 days. It is enacting comprehensive and just COVID-19 relief. It is guaranteeing quality health care regardless of any pre-existing conditions. It is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour immediately, updating the poverty measure, guaranteeing quality housing for all, enacting a federal jobs program, protect and expand voting rights and civil rights, guaranteeing safe, quality, and equitable public education, comprehensive and just immigration reform, ensuring all the rights of Indigenous peoples, enacting fair taxes, targeted tax credits, using the power of executive order, redirecting that bloated Pentagon budget towards priorities that matters for our national security, and working to establish a presidential council to advocate for this bold agenda. Now is the time, because we have the power. We have the power to push this forward. We have the power to shift the narrative, because yes, we need transitional change policy-wise, but we also know that we need transitional change when it comes to the narrative, the heart transition that needs to occur in this country. We have to move towards a heart transition that allows for, regardless of who's in office, that policies are going to be for the people, and is going to be centering those most in the margins, those who are low income, those who are poor, because before the pandemic, 140 million poor and low income people were living in this country. And we know that during this pandemic, it is only exacerbated. So we don't have time to do the baby steps. Now is the time to make the big push forward. And I heard a lot of that being talked about beforehand, about making that transformational policies. And I absolutely agree. And it's time for that bold agenda.
Reverend Kazimir, thank you so much for that. I love the clarity of those policy agenda items, in part because those are both something that you can think about, again, in a very practical way, and think about as in your larger call for accountability. Reverend Lisa, let me turn to you. You are in such a unique position within the denomination, in that Forward Together North Carolina is an entity that exists both during and around the election and has this responsibility to your constituency. Can you speak a little bit to the accountability questions around that as you see them?
Sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, our accountability starts with recognizing our responsibility to do together what we can't do alone. I think in UU the Vote has been an amazing example of our ability to activate our entire faith our ability to get people, I think so many people in UU the vote this year, and I'll let Nicole talk about it more, but I think a lot of people were activated in a way where they felt more deeply than they ever have before what it feels like to be a part of a movement. And now that we know what that feels like, me included, we can't go back. We can't go back. So our responsibility is to, in knowing, oh, we called 100,000 people in 4 days. Oh, we called 3 million people. We have a responsibility again to do together what we can't do alone. And that's what makes our partnership with UUSJ, where we called logged nearly 1,000 hours of phone calls just to North Carolina, because of our congregations in UUSJ and across the country showed up for us. So we've got to make sure that we are organizing our denomination to really exercise the full weight, the full capacity, and imagine even greater capacity for what's possible. Thinking about more local, just the logistics of organizing and making sure we're accountable to our partners moving forward. We've deepened our relationships. We've got to make sure people know that this wasn't an election year type of an engagement. And so I thought of 2 things that we've done this year to make sure that we are living into our responsibility to be designed as an organization to be nimble and responsive to our partners. One thing is the action hour model. So we learned this from UUSC, and a lot of our partners, Surge, a lot of folks are starting to do an action hour model, especially in a pandemic where people show up on Zoom for an hour. There's a set of actions and we do them together. It feeds purpose, it feeds community, and it's a way to be very quickly responsive to the needs of our community partners. So every Friday at 11, every single Friday at 11, UUs from across North Carolina show up to a Zoom, and whatever our partners have asked us to do that week, we do it. And I know I'm doing my job right when on Thursday afternoon, I get a call from someone who says, I have something for you for tomorrow morning, right? So people understand our partners. My job is for our partners to understand what our systems are and how we are structured, and be able to imagine where we fit in, right? How we can amplify, right? So for example, with the election, a quick example, our partners needed parking lots across the state. And so we made sure that we gave a full list of all of our 26 congregations across the state to our closest partners and said, if you need a parking lot in New Bern, if you need a parking lot in rural Western North Carolina, this is where we are. Pick up the phone, we will show up for you. So when our partners, when we're clear with our partners about what our capacity is and how we can show up for them and then make sure that we do, I think that's the kind of accountability that we need to continue to do moving forward. So do together what we can't do alone, and make sure we are designed to be nimble and not just trying to hustle when an ask comes our way.
Lisa, thank you so much. And the thing that I especially love about that model that you're lifting up is it teaches volunteers and people who want to help how to help, which is to say, the ask will change because circumstances change. But if we can commit to a certain period of time in the week where we know we are going to make a difference, we can allow ourselves to be the most helpful and the most responsive. So that's something that I love about what you did in North Carolina. Nicole, let me turn to you because you have been so instrumental this year in making sure that this denomination puts its feet on the ground and does more than talk. You have made this year about action through the work of UU the Vote, and deserve all the credit in the world for that. It is a big and a complicated job, and you just did it so beautifully. If you could, can you speak a little bit about what we can think about our next steps being for as a denomination in this kind of work?
Thank you for those kind words, Kelsey.
Well deserved.
You know, I think that what we're learning from this great conversation is how this idea of accountability and how this idea of organizing actually intersects, right? Who are we accountable to? Why do we organize, right? And in service to what? because everyone organizes, right? As we see. And I'm just thinking about Reverend Kazimir's words about doing that heart and soul work, right? Because that is the foundation of faith-based organizing, right? Is that we don't just seek to transform our world, we seek to transform ourselves. And as you know, it's been beautiful to see the music being lifted up in this program. And it's always great when I can hear that the We Shall Be Known song that we actually had our You the Vote choir sing, because those lyrics are meaningful. I think people find both peace and guidance in those songs because it says, we shall be known by the company we keep. If that isn't a mandate to our organizing, I don't know what else is. MLK said, those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war. So we really have to be honest about our values, right? And the last song that actually Leah sung was, we choose where we stand. And we have this, campaign called Side with Love, right? It's a way to consistently reimagine and recommit to how we do the work of justice and how we organize. So it is calling us into a politic, right? A politic that sometimes goes so far outside what our legislators tell us is possible. I'm thankful for Representative Connolly talking about having a bold agenda, right? But we know that when policy gets written and when policy hits the floor or doesn't hit the floor, that it is about sometimes compromise. And it is, about sometimes bipartisanship. And, I think he talked about setting expectations, right? But what we expect as a faith is to work towards collective liberation. So You the Vote intentionally saw 2020 as a goalpost, but we were rooted, right, in our principles. We said we vote love and defeat hate to be a certain type of people, to be pro-immigration, to be pro-democracy, to be pro-reparations, right? To be anti-extractive capitalism, to support climate justice. And what I think this heart shift, right, this cultural shift that we need in this movement is calling us into is saying, well, where do we see that happening? Right, we did a lot of work to stop voter suppression, to in fact support, right, the work of people of color, organizers and voters. So what are we doing when their voices are lifted up, right? Are we choosing to side with them, or are we organizing for a different purpose? And I think that is what, we keep talking about what's next and what we're gonna lead our faith into. And it's going to be leading folks into really figuring out how do we have big, bold visions, right? Because we do that work, but then how do we create intentional containers that do both effective work and leadership organizing while also transforming ourselves and making sure that we are always ministry forward, which I just want to say was critical and heavily supported by the wonderful Reverend Ashley Horan, who you'll hear from later, and our newly ordained Reverend Lisa Garcia-Sampson. I'm just always going to give you a shout out. So yeah.
Nicole, thank you so much. That brilliantly said. Friends, I got permission from the powers that be to go on just a little bit longer. So I think if we can do nice, tight answers, we can do one more round of questions. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I think about accountability, it's easy to think about that as unidirectional. So it's just these organized people trying to hold elected officials accountable. But, the knock on organizing is that we come into affected communities once a year, once every couple of years, and we ask for votes and we ask for favors and we ask for work, and then we disappear until we need something from them again. So I think in various ways we've all done good work to stay accountable to the communities that we talk to and that we work with. And I'd like to hear from all of us some strategies for how we keep that accountability up to the communities we serve, even in the off season. So, Reverend Kazimir, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to begin with you, because again, I think Poor People's Campaign is such a model for doing this well.
Absolutely. And so the co-chairs, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II and Reverend Dr. Liz Thiel Harris will tell you when it comes to centering the needs of the poor and low income, a part of that is having impacted folks' voice lifted up and centered. It is not an we don't say we're an organization, we're an organism, we're a movement. And when we say we are lifting from the bottom, we are lifting all voices. So you're going to be hearing from impacted folks that are saying what our lives are like living off of $3.25 an hour working at Waffle House, what our lives are like when we're living next to a coal ash pond, what our lives are like when we can't get access to health care. And so a part of that accountability is making sure the voices are being centered, the voices are being heard, the voices are in leadership, guiding and pushing towards this agenda, that this is not something where you have a front-facing organization or a figurehead, and then somebody else comes and say, no, we're putting forward the faces, the voices, the narrative of those who are impacted. And I would also say that when the time comes, our accountability to one another is signing those petitions. It is educating ourselves about the policy agenda, supporting those policy agendas, going online for the actions, the caravans, and when it's safe, the in-person actions will come too. So we have accountability to ourselves, and of course, holding our officials accountable, because they need to also be pushed. It is our efforts that are going to push that forward. So I would say that is definitely how we can keep ourselves accountable and making sure the voices that are most impacted are front and centered.
Yeah, thank you. Sara, I'd love to hear your reflections on this.
Yeah, and I think it starts, if it hasn't already, it's something that I think what Reverend Lisa was saying about, and everyone has said, that is part of the process even before we get to elections, in terms of partnerships and being in relationship on the ground with faith and secular communities. So, but if that hasn't happened yet in the work that's been done, it's like, this is the time to really regroup and make sure those relationships are strong, because if you're not in a position to continue the organizing, but you work with a partner organization like we have done with CASA for many years in Virginia, this sort of, they have a stronger capacity on the ground in Virginia than Faith in Public Life as an organization does. So sort of in between election cycles, we shift over the folks that we've been working and organizing with to the work CASA is doing, and together support each other. And it's sort of being in conversation and knowing kind of who has capacity for what, but also that Liz, knows always they can call us at any point if there's something that's needed, and then we can kind of ramp up again. And so different models, I think, are also ways of, I thought, Lisa, what you suggested was a really great idea, something we're going to look into. And just kind of finding continuous ways, and especially in this time of virtual organizing, there is this unique opportunity to bring together people in ways that have been more challenging in the past, still with its challenges, but that I would encourage us all to look at as opportunity in this coming year and perhaps longer, of how we keep that engagement going, so that we can hold all elected officials accountable, because that's the ultimate end of elections, is not just winning, but it's for change, for redistributing power.
Absolutely. Thank you. Pam, you and the READ Project have built such a good ongoing relationship in North Carolina. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about in this conversation, right? So the very first action of the READ Project in 2014 was when Reverend Barber asked people from outside of North Carolina to come and show up and to be present and to support the Moral Mondays movement. And, that was the beginning of a story that carried all the way through to 2020 of not just working on elections, but being there for direct actions, hosting people who come to the nation's capital to help amplify and support the power of our partner organizations. And so, I think also as we've gotten a lot of new people involved this year, they've like written postcards and made calls and gotten really excited about the focused action that we just did, and the high stakes is really to support folks understanding the stakes are still really high, right? I mean, we just heard 14 things that we really got to do right now. And all the skills that people have built, and the engagement and the the partnerships are what we need to actually get that done. So I'm actually pretty excited about that this is not just a one-off story, right? That this is a sustained and growing movement, agree with movement, to build and share power and capacity to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you. So I was asked to end by 5:58. So Lisa and Nicole, with all the love to you, I'm going to give the last word to Liz, who is working with immigrant communities every single day and probably has some great insight how we stay accountable to these communities that we've built.
It's so funny that you bring this up today. Actually, last weekend, we just had our internal accountability session with our own membership, where our elected member leaders came together and we asked the hard questions. We said, we don't know what's going to happen in the Senate. We know we have a new president who's going to have limited capacity. We don't know what kind of immigration proposals are going to be out there. How are we going to decide what's worth fighting for, what's worth showing up in DC, and what we should take a pass on? And they asked hard questions. They said, well, how many people is it going to impact? How long are they going to benefit? Who's going to be harmed by whatever relief is passed? Who's going to be left out? And they really pushed us. And I think that's the same kind of accountability that we're going to try to bring to anybody who's working with us, who says, hey, come on to this thing. It's immigration's included. We're going to lift up our members' values and their voices. And I'm going to close with one story, just because that's what I do. I'm an organizer. And this is a story of a young lady from Pennsylvania who's on our board of directors. Her name is Arlette Morales. She's from Mexico. She's lived in New York for almost all of her young life. She's 19 years old right now. And she would have qualified for DACA. She does qualify for DACA, but she turned 15 a week and a half after President Trump canceled the program. She's been fighting ever since. She's been fighting for herself, for her parents, for the DACA program. She helped us register voters. She helped us call voters. She mobilized her entire high school to show up and help on election day. And just with the court case last week, she's now newly eligible to apply for DACA for the first time, now that she's a graduating senior and getting ready to apply for college. But she's got her eyes wide open. She knows that this is a little window that could shut at any time, and that real power is what we need to build, and we don't build it on our own. We need to bring all of our friends into this movement because it's all one movement. She stood up strong and co-sponsored a Black Lives Matter rally with her best friend from high school this summer. And her best friend is coming with us to Wilmington next week, where we're going to be standing outside of Joe Biden's office and reminding him what he committed to. That's the kind of solidarity we need to build together. And it's young people like that that are really showing us the way. So I think all of us are better off if we can stand back and let the young people who are directly affected lead us. That's the power we need to build. Thank you so much to everyone in this network, everything you've done and everything that I know you will continue to keep doing.
Absolutely. And I can't wrap in any better way than that. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you all to everybody on this panel for coming today and for all the work you've done. I am honored and humbled and grateful to be in community and in this work with you. Thanks so much.
The state of Alabama